Mike Brown, the former FEMA director.
Joining us here is the former FEMA director.
History, I think, was very unkind to you, my friend. Very unkind.
Mr. Brown, thanks for being with us.
This is Michael Brown Unplugged.
Welcome to this episode of Michael Brown Unplugged. Glad to have you with me. Now, I understand that people like Beto O'Rourke, Robert Francis O'Rourke, on the Democrat side running for president, that when you are low in the polls and your campaign's going nowhere, that you tend to say anything that you can to get attention. But sometimes what they say, even if it's just trying to get attention, really gives us a window into how these people think, what their worldview is. And Beto O'Rourke did that recently in Des Moines, Iowa, when he was at a rally and said this.
Off the streets and out of our homes so that no one ever has to fear that again. And people will ask us, they'll say, hey, Beto, aren't you afraid that you've gone too far? That you've really pissed off the NRA this time? I'm not afraid of that. No, I'm not afraid of that. I would be afraid if I were a school teacher in a kindergarten classroom and those kids for whom I'd already sacrificed so much were up against a gunman with an AR-15 because we didn't have the courage to stop him while we still had time. I would be afraid if I were the son of an immigrant who went to work early this morning and never came back, detained and deported back to a country he had not seen for 20 years. I would be afraid if I were one of those farmers here in Iowa who had seen those markets closed to me, unable to get out of debt or to pass that farm on to my daughter or to my son. I would be afraid if I was a trans woman of color who could be killed with complete impunity in this country right now.
Whoa. He would be afraid if he would. Now, I'm not even going to all of the other stuff that he said. The NRA doesn't give a rat's ass about Beto O'Rourke, Robert Francis O'Rourke. Farmers, I don't care about, but black trans women who can be killed in this country with impunity. It really shows the depths of desperation. But it's also a great example of how identity politics has so infused the mindset of the progressive left that he doesn't mention a young black man in Chicago or a young black woman in Chicago, a single mother in Chicago, regardless of her color, who fears for her baby or her children's lives because of the gang violence. I haven't heard him talk about that. But instead, he has to point that he fears, which is another point I want to get to in just a second, but he fears for a black transgender woman who can be killed with impunity in this country. Who's that? Who is that? The litany of fears is how the Democrats expect to get elected. In fact, I would say politicians of all stripes tend to use fear. You should fear this and you should fear that. We should fear everything. The thing that I fear most is the destruction of the republic. I think it's a rational fear. I think the country has survived a lot worse than what we're going through now. But I do sincerely believe that if the progressive left wins this election and wins control of the legislative branch, that whether or not we'll be able to recover in 2 years, 4 years, or 8 years from the progressive agenda that will drive the economy, that will drive the free market, that will drive the constitutional principles that have made this country the greatest country on earth for the past 200 plus years, whether we can survive that or not. Sometimes the greatest weapon is not a musket, is not a rifle. Sometimes the greatest weapon is propaganda. And those on the left who tell us that we can get all these free things, that we should fear this or we should fear that, I actually fear them. I fear them other than the fact that I still believe, and I hope I'm never proven wrong, but I still believe that the vast majority of Americans believe in a free market economy. that they understand the constitutional principles and they understand the Bill of Rights and they understand why we have a Second Amendment, why we have a First Amendment, and that we should be able to speak freely and to criticize freely, and we should be able to assemble peaceably, that we should be able to petition the government for redress, that we should be secure in our persons and our places from unreasonable searches and seizures, that we should not have to testify against ourselves nor be forced to testify against ourselves. I think a vast majority of Americans still believe those things. And I think they see what the Democrats are doing, and they're trying to whip up fear, trying to convince us, those of us who are on the right side of the political spectrum, that we're the evil ones. We're not the evil ones. Quite frankly, we're the compassionate ones because we understand better than anyone else that the private sector does so much better than the public sector. There was a story out recently about a state audit in the state of Colorado that had studied over $100 million that was being spent over a 2 or 3 year period on school safety. And the state audit could not assess the effectiveness of that $100 million expenditure. But they were able to look at a $700,000 private foundation. I Love You So Much Foundation, founded by a gentleman whose daughter was killed in a school shooting. And they found that $700,000 expenditure had been much more effective, not only in Colorado schools where those protocols had been implemented, but in schools throughout the country on a $700,000 budget. But the state government spends $100 million, and the state auditor can't find any effectiveness whatsoever. That's kind of what I fear. I'll be right back. In some of the worst unintentional comedy that I've heard in a long time, this dumbass protester tells a crowd in New York during the UN Climate Summit that he broke down crying because, he couldn't bring kids into the world because of climate change.
My conscience couldn't handle the idea of bringing someone into a dying world. But I have hope. I still think I can be a father one day, but only if we act. Are we gonna act? Yeah! Are we gonna act? Yeah!
Yeah, we're going to act, but I got to tell you, when you think about the decline in global extreme poverty around the world, when you think about the increased food production, when you think about what we've done in terms of fracking and shale oil, when you think about all of the incredible technological advancements that we have made, I don't think this world is dying. I think this world is making incredible advances that oftentimes go unnoticed, unrecognized, or underappreciated. And if you're so afraid of the future because of climate change, something over which we have little, if any, control whatsoever, you're making the choice not to bring a child into this world. And that is your choice. Just don't go protesting and tell me that you refuse to bring a child into this world because this world is dying. Why don't you just stop for a moment? Look around. Do an assessment of how pollution has been reduced, how we have made incredible progress in cleaning up our air and our water, how we have made such incredible progress in improving the lives of people medically, economically, socially, all over the world. But that's not what it's about, is it? No, it's really about power and control. These are the useful idiots of our times. These are the useful idiots that would much rather claim that we must have the government step in and spend trillions of dollars on policies that will not make a gnat's butt difference in climate change. The climate's going to do what the climate's going to do. And if you choose not to bring a child into this world, that's your choice. But don't tell me it's because of a dying world. We can expect a lot of this kind of dumbassery as the global UN climate conference and the UN General Assembly continues this year because, that's what the UN stands for. World government. And world government, if you really get down to the nitty-gritty of climate change, You can only do that if you have the agreement or the control of governments throughout the world, because every sovereign nation makes its own choices on how to spend its citizens' tax dollars, on the public policies that it adopts, and whether or not we think that there is any way that we can influence them. Maybe we can diplomatically, maybe we can through sanctions or otherwise have an effect on the government, but a sovereign government makes its own choices. Are we going to tell China to clean up its act? And even if we did, how would we go about forcing that? We can't. So it's useful idiots screaming into the darkness. Scream all you want to. Instead, I choose to look around at the good things in the world. I'll be right back. I would normally save this for Friday when Christian Toto comes in and we do Hollywood and Toto on the radio, but it'll probably be old news by then. But Megan Fox was on The View recently, and she's talking about how she encourages her 6-year-old son to wear dresses to school, despite taunts from his classmates. Now, once upon a time, parents used to believe that they were there to teach their children. And I know that if my son came home and said that he wanted to wear a dress, my 6-year-old son came home and said that he wanted to wear a dress, and if for some reason I allowed him, which I probably would not do, allow him to wear a dress to school, and he came back and told me how he had gotten jeers and taunts from the other kids in the class, I probably would have sat him down and explained to him that, well, that's because you're a boy and boys don't normally wear dresses, and so you're doing something that is not ordinary. You're doing something that, while I can't necessarily justify them taunting you, your actions have brought about the taunts of these children. So how do you go about encouraging your 6-year-old son to wear a dress to school despite the taunts from classmates?
I have 3 sons.
Yeah.
And your son, Noah, is very much into fashion.
Yeah.
Now, does he ever pick out outfits for you to wear?
He does. He designs, he draws outfits, and then when I do fittings, he's very talented. And but he's still 6, so when I do fittings, like I did one recently, and I had this really beautiful yellow dress on, and he kept draping it in a way where he was like, if we do it like this, it looks like a diaper. Diaper? That's not what we're going for this time, but maybe next time. So he's really into fashion, and he's the one, like, sometimes he'll dress himself, and he likes to wear dresses sometimes, and I send him to a really liberal, like, hippie school, but even there, here in California, he still has little boys going like, boys don't wear dresses or boys don't wear pink. And so we're going through that now where I'm trying to teach him to be confident no matter what anyone else says.
Yeah. That's right. And be yourself.
Yeah. He had stopped wearing dresses for a while. He just wore one 2 days ago to school. And he came home, and I was like, how was it? Did any of the friends at school have anything to say? And he was like, well, all the boys laughed when I came in, but he's like, but I don't care. I love dresses too much.
Okay. I have nothing. Now, maybe you agree with that concept, but a 6-year-old, their brains don't know any better. You're helping, you're actually encouraging this child to suffer the taunts of other school children. Oh, but Michael, these other kids shouldn't be taunting him. They should be, inclusive and supportive of him. They're 6-year-olds. How do you expect 6-year-olds to not behave like 6-year-olds? Tell your son that if he wants to wear a dress in the privacy of your home, then, you will let him do that. But that mommy's not going to let her 6-year-old son be subjected to taunts because he's choosing to do something that is going to bring about these taunts. It is, I don't know, maybe the way I parented, and the way I was parented is just so far gone and so far out of the ordinary now that you subject your child to schoolyard taunts because you want to be seen as politically correct. How sad for this child. How very, very sad. In a jaw-dropping comparison, even for this hyperbolic campaign season that we're in right now, liberal mega donor and 2020 Democratic candidate Tom Steyer compared his multi-million-dollar impeachment effort against Donald Trump to fighting the Nazis. Seriously. You know, his father prosecuted Nazis at the Nuremberg trials in the 1940s, according to the New York Times. And then Steyer made this self-aggrandizing comparison at the Polk County Democrat steak fry in Des Moines back on September 21st. He downplayed his wealth, saying that when I read about myself in the paper, I sometimes think that my first name is billionaire. Well, you are a billionaire. And just because you're a billionaire doesn't necessarily mean or give you liberty to compare your impeachment move against Donald Trump to prosecuting or fighting the Nazis.
My dad was the first generation in his family to go to college. He became a lawyer. He quit his law practice to go into the Navy in World War II, and then he prosecuted the Nazis at Nuremberg.
Good for your father.
They were from that Depression era, World War II generation where people thought you give as much to America as you get from America. And when I started Need to Impeach, I was thinking about my father and the Nazis. When you see something wrong in America, you fight it. You don't ask what's politically tactical, what's good for you. You fight it every day before it gets too strong. And that's what I was doing.
I think comparing fighting something that is wrong is fine. And if you think that what Donald Trump is doing is wrong, then you can make that comparison all day long as far as I'm concerned, and you'll get no retort or rebuttal from me, other than I might argue the merits of your case. But when you go that extra leap and you say in unequivocal terms, according to that soundbite, that what Donald Trump is doing is the equivalent of what the Nazis were doing, that's when you cross the line. Donald Trump might be a lot of things. And people can hate him and despise him for all sorts of reasons. And you can support him for all sorts of reasons. But what you cannot do, by any stretch of the imagination, is compare Donald Trump to the Nazis. Donald Trump has not marched anybody into death camps. He hasn't committed genocide. He hasn't done anything that the Nazis have done. And quite frankly, in my opinion, Tom Steyer steps on the virtue of what his father did by making that comparison. It's at times like this that I really wish we could reach beyond the grave and we could ask somebody like Tom Steyer's father, who prosecuted the season, whose son, Tom Steyer, is very proud of it. How do you feel about your son comparing a current president of the United States of America, duly elected by people in this country? How do you feel about him comparing what he's doing to what the Nazis did in Europe in World War II? I'm not sure he'd like the comparison. He might tell his son to shut up, which is what I'd like to do. I'll be right back. Well, knife control has officially arrived. And I have to laugh because I think that I'm probably so old that I remember when knife control was actually a joke that I made on the radio and not a thing that was under serious consideration. But Church of England leaders in the Diocese of Rochester have joined forces with, quote, leading crime experts as well as members of parliament and community leaders in a letter asking the government to actually consider banning pointed kitchen knives. From the letter, or actually from a newspaper. They've written a letter asking for a ban on the sale of pointed kitchen knives. The letter was also signed by leading crime experts as well as members of parliament and community leaders. It comes after a conference called The Point. How clever, right? The Point. In Chatham last week, which raised awareness of the issue as statistics show that there has been an 80% rise in knife crime in the United Kingdom since 2014. Now, I'm going to take that statistic at face value. Why do you think that is? I don't know why it is, but I'll tell you what it shows. That if you want to commit a crime and you need a weapon, you will find something to use as a weapon. The signatories, the story goes on to say, the signatories have urged government to, quote, take urgent measures to promote the sale of safe kitchen knife designs and restrict those designs which have been used in so many acts of violence. It's like saying you want to ban AR-15s because, well, 2 shooters in Texas used an AR-15. It totally ignores the fact that most crimes in which a gun is used, they don't use long rifles. They use handguns. The story continues that a 5-year study in Edinburgh found that of the sharp instruments used in homicides, 94% were kitchen knives. Research demonstrates kitchen knives are used in a large percentage of homicides due to their availability and lethal nature. Criminologists have demonstrated that reducing availability in turn reduces crime. Boy, I'd like to see that statistic. Listen again. Criminologists have demonstrated that reducing availability in turn reduces crime. Now, I assume they're talking about availability of pointy knives. It doesn't say that. It just says reducing availability. Availability of what? Baseball bats? Golf clubs? What? They then go on to suggest the only people who need sharp, pointy knives are those too lazy to find scissors. The letter endorses research highlighted at the conference, which explains that points on domestic knives are historic and no longer necessary. Quote, historically, we needed a point on the end of our knife to pick up food because forks weren't invented. Now we only need the point to open packets when we can't be bothered to find the scissors. Seriously? The United Kingdom, who has ridiculously strict gun laws, has experienced skyrocketing knife crime in recent years. It's almost like people who are hell-bent on committing acts of violence are going to do so without guns or with guns or without knives or with knives or, well, with anything they can get their hands on. You know, trying to take away everything that can be used as a weapon. I'm holding an ink pen in my hand right now. It's kind of pointed on the end. And with just enough force, yeah, I can kill you. We need to eliminate ink pens. Ink pen control. I demand it now. It's not hard to find examples of Trump derangement syndrome, TDS. But I'm always fascinated by the different kinds of TDS that exist and the places that you do find TDS. Well, a North Carolina high school canceled a football game because of TDS. Now, what do you think happened? Well, the cheerleaders committed the cardinal sin.
Over a pro-Trump banner forced officials at a North Carolina high school to abruptly cancel a football game over safety concerns. Cheerleaders at North Stanley High School near Charlotte were placed on probation after they posed with a Trump 2020 Make America Great Again banner prior to a game back in August. The North Carolina Athletic Association determined that the squad had violated school policy banning political advertisements on campus or at school events. That move sparked protests, and so when hundreds of supporters of these cheerleaders vowed to show up at a game on Friday night, school officials decided that there would not be a game. Mercy over a...
There would not be a game. There would not be a game because a bunch of pro-Trump supporters were going to show up in solidarity with the cheerleaders. Because, you know, those Trump supporters are so wild and out of control that they were just going to show up and take their posters and their signs and just beat the crap out of everybody. This is how ridiculous it's become. It's fascinating to me because now it is public safety. We're now using public safety as a reason to shut down a football game because you fear the people that are showing up are Trump supporters. What would happen if the new Black Panther Party, what would happen if Antifa decided to show up at this football game in North Carolina? Do you think they would cancel the game then? Or do you think they would fear canceling the game because, well, it might be racist if you decide to cancel a game because the new Black Panther showed up or Antifa showed up? It's a double standard. Always has been and it always will be a double standard. I just like pointing it out because I have yet to find examples of pro-Trump demonstrators, protesters, supporters, whatever label you want to put on them, of committing acts of violence in a public place. Yeah, I keep looking, and I have yet to find it. Thanks for listening to this episode of Michael Brown Unplugged. It's a little short this morning because, well, I've got to go jump on a plane and go to Washington, D.C. And I just want to give everybody a heads up, too. There is a 50-50 chance that there will not be a podcast on Wednesday morning. It just depends on how much time my meetings take in Washington and how much time I have left to actually do a podcast. So if one doesn't get posted over the next day or so, it's because I'm in Washington, and I just want to apologize in advance for it. But again, thanks for listening to this episode, and hopefully I'll talk to you again tomorrow.